So every now and then I long for something that has changed. When I happen to mention it to my nieces and nephews, they usually grunt at me and then roll their eyes at me because it means I'm getting old, of course, because they can't understand why I wouldn't like something a little more easy, a little more convenient, a little more immediately, right? Well, I try to explain that immediate doesn't necessarily always mean that it's satisfying, right? Or that we experience it. Anticipation can be a good thing sometimes. So one of the things I long for is how we used to write letters and correspond, right? So when I first went to college, I used to correspond with my family all the time. Letters in the mail, right? Times were different. We didn't have the electronic communication systems we do today. No emails, we didn't have electronic video chats, we didn't have the cell phones. And so communication took a little longer, and it took a little effort and a little work. And I loved those letters. They were inspiring. They were sometimes goofy. They were fun. They were silly. But they were wonderful ways. In fact, I still have a couple of those letters that are in my house somewhere. I can't lay my fingers on them. I just moved in, but I know they're there. I remember my mother wrote me this one letter when I was struggling at one point. I was working full-time, going to school full-time, and I started having all these doubts and fears, and just a great letter about her belief in me and that support, that spirit of hope, right? Well, around this time, there was, I guess you would call it a certain practical joke going on, where people would mail other people letters, and it would look something like this. So if it was addressed to me, it would say, "Dear Don," and then there would be 7 or 8 blank pages, all numbered, right? And you'd get to the very last page, and on the very last page, it would say something like, "I'm sorry this letter is so long, I had a lot to share." And then they would sign it, "Love," and then somebody you knew, right? So in my case, it would be one of my brothers or sisters. Well, all my family received one of these, right, in the mail. They received these multiple blank pages with that little note at the end, and it was signed "Love," and then it would sign one of my brothers or sisters' names, right? So it became this mystery. Who was sending these out to everyone? And of course, everybody had their theories and were blaming and accusing one another, but no one would ever admit it, right? To this day, no one in my family has ever admitted doing that. But what it did do, right, it was that connection. Silly, yes. Goofy, yes. But it brought us together. I share this experience today as we gather because that's how God walks with us. We receive that powerful living presence through our family, right? Through our gathered community. And we do that by opening ourselves and bonding and experiencing the real presence, the power of the Holy Spirit, sisters, especially through our relationships and especially through our brothers and sisters in Christ. And it's precisely the reason God gathers us every Sunday to provide for and care for and bestow his love upon us in this very powerful celebration of the Eucharist. And as we break open the Word today, that is very key and instrumental to understanding how we are able to live our faith well. In other words, how we're able to do this, right? Get up every day and to the best of our ability, walk in this world and live in such a way in what we say and what we do that it reflects that deep abiding belief that we have through our own experience of God's unconditional love and the glory of the cross in our life. And so as we break open the Word, like I said, it is a very, very blunt gospel. It talks about the reality and the truth of what we encounter as a people of faith every day in the world in which we live. That we will encounter great challenges. We will encounter evil in many different forms, large and small. And all the weapons of evil will be thrown at us in an attempt to imprison us, to destroy us, to manipulate us, to trap us in darkness and sin. Make no bones about it. It is extremely difficult to get up every day and walk in faith in this world and face the challenges of evil that we face, seeking to hold us prisoner in the darkness and capture us. And all we have to do is look through our human history to see how evil works. And the fundamental thing that evil seeks to do, of course, is cut us off from the love of God, to separate us from the light of truth, that light that dispels the darkness and destroys evil. That's what evil seeks to do in all of its ways, in all of its cunning forms, right? It seeks to separate us from God. And the major way that evil does that is by creating division within humankind, by separating us from our brothers and sisters, by seeking to convince us that it is okay when we encounter another human being to treat them as less, right? That somehow, some way they are less. And our history shows this, and still today it's true, right? That someone is held in lesser form because of maybe what they believe and how they believe. Maybe it's because of the color of their skin. Maybe it's because we're male or female, and because they're one or the other, they're treated as less, right? Evil seeks to divide us, to convince us that the human being we encounter is somehow not someone who deserves dignity and respect, right? That's what evil does. And it does it in such insipid ways, even in small ways. Think about this, right? The value our society holds on the occupation you have. You know, the value they weigh for someone who might be a surgeon or a cardiologist as compared to someone who's a janitor. The value they place on the occupation of someone who might be a nurse as compared to someone who's a waiter or a waitress. Ways of convincing us that they're less, that there's something not as worthy about them. And we encounter that with the truth, right? The Word of God, the light, the truth of our faith, that seed God planted, the seed of faith, is that counter to evil in our world. And God makes that very clear, right? Jesus makes that very clear. We encounter and we confront evil with the light of God that dispels the darkness that seeks to imprison. And the fundamental truth of our faith is this: we are God's children. Each and every human life was created in the very image and likeness of God. We are sacred by our very creation. We are worthy and valuable by our very creation. And that holds true for every living human being. And it doesn't matter what they look like. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter where they live. It doesn't matter what they have. Their value, their worthiness is innate, created in the image and likeness of God Himself. From the very moment of our creation, that sacredness is instilled in the human being. And that means, right? That means I am worthy, sacred, and good in the eyes of God. And so is everyone I encounter, right? Everyone I encounter has that same sacredness, that same worthiness, and no one is less than. See the power of evil, right? It tries to convince us that that is not fundamentally true, and it's okay to treat someone as less than for whatever reason we can possibly imagine, right? Think about how easy it is to judge one another, right? Before someone even opens their mouth, we might look at them and have cast a judgment that in our mind is saying one thing only: they're not as good as me. That's what it's saying. That is the power of evil and the force of God's light and truth, that seed of grace and love he plants into us, right? The seed of faith is how we confront evil and keep it from imprisoning us in the darkness and sin that separates us from that very love of God, from the very grace of that faith that God has planted within us. And so ultimately, as people of faith, what we're simply seeking to do every day is to walk with one another by understanding and seeing one another as God sees us, right? By seeing each other as God sees us, in all of our goodness, right? In all of our glory. The challenge is, our society teaches survival of the fittest. And so what does that mean? That any moment, at any time, in any place, with any person I encounter, I need to be ready to destroy, to manipulate, and to control if I feel threatened or in danger. Right? That's what survival of the fittest means. At any time, any moment, I am ready to defeat and destroy someone else in order for me to survive and to get what I want. God, right, does just the opposite. He looks for the goodness, he understands the sacredness, and he seeks to raise that goodness and sacredness up. If we can learn to see, and the first thought to pass our mind when we encounter a brother and sister, especially for the first time, is, this is a child of God. This is a sacred human being. They have value and worth just as I do. They're not any more valuable, they're not any less valuable than me. They are my brother and sister. They are a child of God. Now, if we live that way, right? If we responded that way to every human being that we encountered, we'd experience the fullness of God's kingdom. That's the truth, right? That's the reality. And that's what we try to do every day when we get up, to simply encounter and relate to one another as God has related to us. That great unconditional love. God so loved us. God so understood and created us in this sacredness and goodness that Jesus Christ poured out his life, gave his life so that we might have life. That's the essence of who we are as people of faith. So my family never did find out, or at least no one ever admitted to, sending those letters in the mail. And so I'll reveal the great secret that none of them know. I, of course, was the one that sent those letters in the mail to my brothers and sisters, and no one ever thought it was me. And here's why: because I lived away at college and they are all postmarked in my hometown. They never dawned on them that I would send them to someone else to mail them out for me, right? So they never, ever actually thought it was me. They accused everyone else, but never me. And it was silly, right? It was goofy. But it did what it was supposed to do. It gathered us together in hope, in joy, to enjoy and have fun with the reality of the gifts and the blessing that God has given us through one another. That's what we're here for, right? To gather in the joy, that essential hope of the blessings God has bestowed upon us as a family of believers, as brothers and sisters, as sacred children of God.